Welcome to In the Margins. I'm Ralph Newell, and we'll continue with the third installment of our series dealing with white fragility and nationalism in higher education. Today, we welcome Tim Wise, who is one of our nation's most prominent anti-racist essayists and educators, whom scholar and philosopher Cornel West calls a vanilla brother in the tradition of abolitionist John Brown. So welcome, Brother Wise.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. We'll just get started here. So you've written a number of books and essays, dealing with racism, and our audience can go to your website, timwise.org to see all of that. But, you and I, just looking at your bio, we're about the same age, probably a year apart. So, I'm thinking about when I was in college during the apartheid movement, I guess silently, I wasn't doing anything. So, but, I see that, you were out there protesting, and then later, shortly after that, you're campaigning against David Duke. Again, at a time like that for me, I didn't have an inclination to do things like that. So I'm just wondering where did that zeal and passion come from for you to do this kind of work?
Well, I wasn't a very good student, so I had to find something to do in college that was more valuable to me. I was into the stuff I was into when it came to classwork. So I always did very well in my, what I majored and minored in, which was political science and Latin American studies. I focused on those things, but I barely showed up to any of the other requirements. I mean, I viewed activism as really when I got down to New Orleans and to Tulane, as something that I just deeply was invested in and wanted to do. I had been, politically conscious and aware in high school. I had been a competitive debater in high school. And I think those of us who come through competitive debate, because we spend so much time researching at the age of 15 and 16 and 17, issues that most 15, 16, 17-year-olds aren't thinking about, frankly, aren't, discussing, but you have to when you're in that world of speech and debate. You end up having this sort of consciousness, whether you like it or not, around a whole lot of things. And for me at that time, that consciousness was, disproportionately around South African apartheid and the anti-apartheid movement, and also peace and justice work in Central America. In fact, when I started school, I mean, that was really, I was more focused on that. I was really looking at it more as a U.S. foreign policy thing. I was more into like international relations. And so even the apartheid stuff, I was looking at more as U.S. international policy with regard to this awful, brutal dictatorship, this white racist dictatorship. And I wasn't really always, at least not yet, connecting that to domestic racism and white supremacy. And that was something that came later, as I began to do the work around anti-apartheid in South Africa, being in a place like New Orleans, which is as close to an apartheid city as you're going to find in the United States, both then and now, before and after Katrina. Being in a place like that, you're going to have folks who are in the community who are going to point out to you. They're going to come uptown to Tulane. These are community activist folks. They're going to come up and they're going to let you know, number one, we're really glad you're doing what you're doing. Keep up the good work. And number two, there's some things you might want to think about that you haven't thought about yet. Mm-hmm. And for those of us in this mostly white anti-apartheid movement at Tulane, because Tulane's a mostly white institution, that was a really important learning curve, and one that, came at me pretty fast, because I thought I was pretty down and knew a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. And it was only really when I had some folks really who became important mentors to me, Ron Chisholm and Barbara Major and different folks at the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, principally, as well as some of the white activists associated with the Institute, who came to me and said, man, this is great what you're doing. Here's some other things you want to connect to it. And it wasn't really until after I got out of school that I began to make those connections. So I went in with the interest, or I went in with like a head full of information, but I didn't really have the tools, to do activism with any integrity or any sort of accountability or thoughts about, the intersections of foreign policy and domestic reality and things like that.
Interesting. Yeah. No, I mean, what you said in the beginning there just, resonated with me. Um, my daughter is very much an activist and into things like that. And ironically, her background is debate and all that. So, because I often wonder, like, where do you get this stuff from? That you're thinking about that, I didn't think about at your age. So, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I was writing term papers my sophomore year of high school about the, I remember doing a research paper on the injustice of of voter disenfranchisement based on, ex-felon status, because at that time, maybe 20 states. Now it's far fewer, but back then 20 states, I think it was, or something like that. If you were an ex-felon, not just a convicted felon at the time, but even after you had served your time, whatever it was, you could be permanently disenfranchised. And especially this was true in southern states. And so that was something we were debating that year. It was one of the cases that was being run by certain teams around the national circuit. And I was so interested in that I turned that into a term paper. And I remember my teacher was just sort of like, what is this? Why are you writing about, because that wasn't what your typical, I was 14 or 15 years old in 10th grade.
Right.
People weren't writing stuff like that, but I was just getting a bunch of debate evidence and making a paper out of it, so I had the leg up in that regard. It wasn't that I was any smarter than anybody else. It wasn't that I was any deeper or more insightful. I just happened to be in an activity that really fortunately, exposed me to a lot of things that I think your typical 15-year-old is not exposed to. And I would just drive teachers crazy, and it would probably drive a lot of my friends crazy too. They were just sort of like, they just looked at me like, who is this? Like, who is this? Why is he in 10th grade? Like, why is he talking this way? This doesn't, I didn't have a lot of friends. I had a lot of people that respected me. I had like 3 people that wanted to hang out with me though, because it was just like, that dude's weird, man. He just like talks about all this serious shit. Whatever.
Yeah, no, I tease my daughter about that same thing. But yeah, birds of a feather, I guess, so to speak. But so obviously, writing those things, has definitely become, I guess, another passion. You've written quite a few books. One in particular, I was reading a little bit here in your book, Dear White America, the letter to a new minority. You talk about how being white long has never meant, the white people had to think about race. Everything has been about and for them in this country, from the culture to the leadership, neighborhoods, et cetera. So, basically, if I'm reading right, all you had to do as a white person in this country was live right and the system would work for you. But, that sort of paradox is seems to be not in balance anymore for some. So
yeah,
what has changed, or what is perceived to have changed, that has brought about this anxiety over some white Americans?
Well, I think there are several things. When I wrote Dear White America, I wrote that in 2011 or 12 or whatever it was. So it's been a decade now.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the middle of the Tea Party stuff after Obama had won and the Affordable Care Act had been passed, and there'd been all that backlash to, Obamacare, and all the backlash to any initiative that Barack Obama had, basically.
Right.
And what I was seeing at the time, and little did I know, I'd like to say that I saw all of this coming. That would be inaccurate. I did not know that what was the Tea Party would develop into this MAGA movement Trump thing. Mm-hmm. But I certainly saw something like it, because what I was suggesting was, there were 4 things that had begun to change all at the same time in, 2008, 2009, 2010. And those 4 things were all, even individually, they were capable of encouraging a lot of white anxiety. Mm-hmm. But they were all happening together. So now they created a perfect storm for white anxiety. And they were, number one, yes, the election of Barack Obama as president, because even for white folks who aren't overtly racist, to have the image of the most powerful person in your country and ostensibly in the world be a black man, and not just a black man, but a black man with a quote unquote exotic name, who lived part of his life outside of the country and then part of it in Hawaii, which I gather a lot of white folks think is just a tourist destination. They seem to forget that it's part of the United States. it's where you go get the flowery T-shirt and a lei around your neck, and they don't really get it that it's like America, and so they have this guy with this different kind of story. I remember Rush Limbaugh, going on the air and saying, well, he's different. He's different because he's not from middle America like the rest of us, as if we're all from Cape Girardeau, Missouri, where Rush was from. But it was that othering, that sense of, even among a lot of non-overtly racist white people, that something's different here, right? So that's number one. You get the black guy running the country. Number two is, of course, that the economy was in a free fall at that time. So now you have white people being confronted with an economic insecurity that they really had not known for 80 years, for 3 full generations, right? Because, yeah, black and brown folks had double-digit unemployment. That wasn't new for people of color. But for white Americans to have double-digit unemployment and all the different things that were happening during that recession, when the housing market collapsed and everything else, that was really new. We weren't used to that, at least not most of us. And so now you got the political anxiety of the Obama victory. You've got the economic anxiety of the recession. The third thing was the cultural shift. So everything in popular culture, music, fashion, entertainment, food, everything becoming thoroughly multicultural in a way that it had not been even just 2 or 3 decades earlier. As I say in the book, I remember, and some of us are old enough to remember when MTV first started. And first off, they used to play music videos. I don't think they do that anymore. But they also didn't play black music.
Nope.
And it's astounding to think about that, because black music is the soundtrack, at least in part, of virtually every young person's life right now. Even if you listen to country music, you're listening to now music being done by black folks with white folks, black hip hop artists making music with white country artists, black artists doing country music. Of course, they've always been doing it, but they were usually pushed to the back and the margins of it. Right. So the everything about popular culture is thoroughly intertwined. And if you're somebody who got used to the culture reflecting you, right? If you got used to the posters on your kid's wall being white movie stars and white entertainers and white singers and white ball players, and all of a sudden they're black and brown. If you got used to going to the grocery store and the ethnic food aisle, for many of us, unless you lived on the coasts, if you lived anywhere other than big cities on the coast, in the 70s, man, the ethnic food aisle was like the pasta aisle, right? I mean, that was literally, and I mean, it wasn't even like 8 kinds of pasta. Like, it wasn't cavatappi or whatever the hell that is. It was, I don't even know what most of these are, but it was like Chef Boyardee, 7 different kinds of Chef Boyardee, right? Ethnic food was Italian, or maybe it was like some lo mein, right? But now you have cuisine, fashion, everything thoroughly interwoven. And again, that's not a big deal for some of us. For some of us, it's great. But if you're used to everything every sign being in English, right? Churches on every corner, but now all of a sudden, and maybe a synagogue every now and then, not too many, but a few, but now there's a mosque, and now there's a Sikh temple, and now there's a Hindu temple. It's like, for some people, that generates anxiety that their country is changing. And then finally, of course, maybe the biggest one of all was the demographic shift. Right. We had been hearing since the early 90s, mid 90s, that by 2030 or 2040, white folks would be less than half of the national population. So when you're confronted with the culture changing, the politics changing, the economy changing, and just the demographic alone changing, so that you're not going to have an absolute majority anymore. You still have disproportionate power. You'll still have plenty of opportunity, but you're not going to be the floor model of an American anymore. You're not going to be the thing we think of in the catalog. When somebody says all American boy or all American girl, we know what that always was historically. Right. And now it could be a Latina. Now it could be, it could be anyone. And when you're used to hegemony, pluralism feels like oppression to you. And so my argument was, all that stuff's happening at once, and it's going to confront a certain portion of white America with the reality that the country that they knew and loved and fetishized is gone. And the question is, how are they going to respond? And my prediction was not well. Little did I know how not well the response was going to be, but it's come pretty clearly true over the last, 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, no, it has. I mean, so yeah, you wrote this in 2012. So looking at it now, I don't know if we would consider us to still sort of be in the short term, but what do you think the long-term ramifications of this anxiety is going to be, or has it already manifested?
Well, I think we're in a medium spot that I didn't necessarily see coming in quite the way that it has. My argument then was basically that, you know, when these folks figure out that they can't win elections, national elections, in terms of the popular vote, maybe even the electoral college, right, they're just going to turn to the weapons that they have amassed, and we're going to see a lot of violence. Now, that's happening. What is also happening, though, is they are trying some strategies for stealing elections that I had never foreseen. I mean, you know, stalking the election commissions, replacing attorney generals and secretaries of state with people that will decertify elections, sending fake electors, trying, you know, storming the Capitol. I didn't really see that. You know, so there's definitely they're trying some things. But see, what scares me is they're trying those things, and the odds are most of them are not going to work, because now we see them. They're telegraphed now. Like, they didn't work the first time. They're going to keep trying them. Hopefully, we will be smart enough to be able to block those. The courts hopefully will block those. The people will, by virtue of who they elect in these various states. But the thing is, right, if it doesn't work, once again, the question that I was asking in Dear White America is like, what do you think they're going to do? Do you think they're just going to go, oh, well, shit, we tried, like we gave it the old college try and we lost, and now we'll just go away and y'all can have, you know, that's fine. No, like, these are not people who lose gracefully. Right. And so my fear is that they're going to try all this stuff. It's probably not going to work. I certainly hope it's not going to work. And then what? And we better be prepared for that. And I don't think we are. Like, I don't think we've been prepared for the backlash. We got so excited when the uprising happened after the murder of George Floyd. There was all of this real excitement and this real sense of like, finally, the revolution is here. And I just remember sitting here doing a bunch of calls and a bunch of events. And I'm like, I don't know, man. We've seen this. And every time that we think the revolution is coming, and every time we think that victory is right in front of us, we forget that every time that's ever happened before, every time there's been any kind of progress and movement building and success, the system fights back, man. The people, the empire strikes back, right? The folks in the Death Star, like, yeah, no, like, this is not, no, like, y'all haven't won yet. And we're not out of moves. And every time, going back to abolition, it's like abolition. Oh, it's like freedom. But then, like, no, see. And then there's a great migration, and it's like, oh, freedom. We got out of the South. And it's like, no. And then people in the North are like, yeah, no. And then we get desegregation. It's like, oh, good. Now we don't have to do separate but equal. You're like, now y'all are integrated, but no, right? And so every time, or we got affirmative action, everything's good. And it's like, not really, right? Every time that there's this step forward, the empire strikes back. And so now we see it with the, you know, attempts to ban any kind of substantive discussion about race in schools. You know, that's a form of, and that's happening now because of the uprising. And we should have seen that coming, rather than getting all excited and thinking like, oh, we're going to abolish the police in 3 years. And we're not going to, you know, we're going to completely reimagine public safety. And we're going to shift all this money into mental health services. Yo, what system do you think you live in? Like, right. What country are you in that you think that's going to happen just because y'all had a protest?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's Pollyannish, and, you know, we look at things through these rose-colored glasses. But I agree. You know, I look at Diverse. You know, been there for 30 years, and you know what we were covering in the 90s. You could open the magazine, we're still covering the same stuff, and you would think, on the surface, you know, you just named a lot of things that have happened in the past 30 years. But when it comes down to equity in higher ed, we're still in the same spot, in a lot of ways. You know, we've sort of dabbled in here a little bit talking about white privilege, and I think I've come from the perspective of, you know, when there is privilege, oftentimes, you know, somebody else is negatively impacted. So oftentimes with white privilege, you say, okay, Black people or people of color, you know, feel the negative impact of that. but you feel it also has a damaging effect on white people. So how so?
Well, this has always been the important struggle, because my feeling about it pedagogically as an educator is that if all we do is try to get white people to see all the advantages that we have and all the ways that we win relative to people of color, you're asking an awful lot to then expect those white folks to say, oh, cool, I'll just give that up. I'm sorry. Like,
right.
So the idea that if we just have them read something I've written or Peggy McIntosh or somebody, like, here's a list of all your privileges and you should check them off and go, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like that's completely absurd. So if you don't give white folks some reason to give up this benefit that isn't just rooted in them being saintly and altruistic, which has never been enough, then my guess is it's not going to work. So strategically, you have to connect them. But I think intellectually, you also have to connect those privileges to some real toxic downsides. And let me give you a few examples of what they are. And we could talk all day about this, and I talk about it a lot in my work, but let's just take the most obvious recent example. We've lost over 1 million people to COVID. The epicenter of failure on the planet when it comes to dealing with this pandemic. Now, ask yourself why. Well, I'm going to suggest to you that it has a lot to do with white supremacy and privilege and fragility and blindness and denial. Because go back to the early part of the pandemic, March and April of 2020, CDC data says that between 28% and 32% of the dead were white, everyone else of color, right? So less than a third of the dead in those first couple of months were white folks. And as soon as that data was released, that was the moment where white America, particularly more conservative leaning white America, checked out, right? That was when they started saying, we got to go to the Capitol and demand the reopening of everything. And we're taking our guns and we're dressing in camouflage and we're telling them we're not going to wear a mask and we're not going to stand 6 feet away at the Trader Joe's because that's tyranny. And we're not going to take the jab. And because why? Because they're not worried, right?
Right.
They weren't scared. Why weren't they scared? Because they're thinking, oh, it's just black people. It's brown folks. It's those folks in New York City. That's the epicenter of the problem. It's the big cities. It's the urban areas, right? It's not us. And so white America, a large section of white America and its leadership took the foot off the brake because the important people, right, weren't the ones who were paying the price. If that headline had come out on April 7th, which is when the headline said it was disproportionately black folks, if that headline had said, for some weird reason, this thing is killing white folks like flies. I mean, I just don't, we don't know why, but it's mostly white people. Do you think those white folks are demanding the reopening of the hair salon? Right? They're actually screaming and yelling, I want to go to Buffalo Wild Wings. Oh, hell no. If it says that it's them dying, if they think it's them, that it's they and their friends and their family who are going to die, they're going to be demanding the government start writing them checks, right? Got to keep us afloat because we can't go to work. But because it was black folks and black lives don't matter to some folks, they took their foot off the brake. Well, what happened? They had the privilege of thinking it wasn't them. Had the ability to be in denial about it being them. That's a privilege. And then by December of 2020, 55% of the dead each month were white. And now collectively, here we are, little over 2 years, 2.5 years into this thing, 63% of all the people who have died are white. So why is that? Well, I want to suggest to you that now it's still disproportionately black and brown when you adjust for age. And I do want to point that out because the reason the white numbers are so high is white folks are more likely to be elderly. And so, but my point being, if you started off only 28% of the dead were white, and now it's 63% of the dead are white, and it was white folks disproportionately on the right who were saying this isn't about us. What that means is we've had hundreds of thousands of white people who have buried family members because they didn't think enough about the problem when it was black and brown folks. And if they had, they might have been a little more cautious and a little bit more supportive of the kind of massive interventions that needed to happen to keep us all safe. So that's how privilege keeps us unsafe, lets us down, gives us an advantage at first psychologically, and maybe even materially, but in the long run, it comes back to haunt us. The opioid crisis is a good example. For years, we responded to drug issues as a criminal matter rather than a public health matter, rather than an issue of treatment and rehabilitation. We recommended prison cells because why? Because it was them. It was those people on that side of town. And now little Jimmy John at the trailer park can't get rehab because we don't have rehab. The reason we don't have rehab is put all the money in jail. So Jimmy John gets to go to jail just like everybody else that was black and brown. And we don't understand why. Well, that was the privilege of thinking that the war on drugs wasn't going to touch us. Deindustrialization. You had jobs starting to leave large urban areas, manufacturing plants shutting down and disproportionately affecting black people in the 1980s, early 80s. And what did white folks say? Well, y'all need to just move where the jobs are. You need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Don't expect the government to help you. Go and find the job. And now you got white folks whose pounds are dying because the plants have left. And what are they saying? They're saying, politicians, you need to bring the jobs back to us so our town doesn't die.
Right.
Well, but y'all let Gary die. Y'all let Flint die. Y'all let these areas die because it wasn't your people. See, so all that privilege, which gives real dividends in the short run, can come back to bite you on the ass in the long run. And that's what we're seeing now.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad to hear you because I was sitting there thinking about it, the opioid crisis, of just how it was treated nationally compared to, other quote unquote drug wars. But anyway, but yes, no, very good point. So, we sort of have, I think, set the stage here of talking about what white privilege is, what nationalism is. How are you seeing those two things playing out in higher education?
Well, I mean, white privilege in higher ed obviously takes on a lot of different shapes, from, the way in which we systemically decide, who's worthy of being in certain institutions as students, to the way that we do tenuring,
right?
To the criteria that are used to evaluate faculty and even staff once they are in place in an institution. And I think we don't revisit this nearly enough. During the pandemic, we've had a what I thought was a very positive trend of getting away, for example, from an over-reliance on standardized tests for admissions. Now, however, as we start to come out of the pandemic, you see a lot of institutions that are, especially elite institutions, that are wanting to sort of sneak that back in because they really desperately want to continue to give this impression that they are more selective and more important than other institutions. There are a lot of other institutions, to their credit, which are recognizing, hey, these standardized tests that we made optional the last several years, it didn't hurt us. It didn't hurt us just because we had a more diverse pool and we had more people applying and we got some great people we would have overlooked before. So it hasn't hurt us at all. But there are still those schools out there who rely on that reputation and who rely on the notion of selectivity and therefore are sort of pandering to that. That is both a class and a race non-neutral move in terms of its effect, right? That has racist effects and classist effects. We also have schools that I think, again, are still very much stuck in the old diversity and inclusion models, which were really just about sort of colorizing the room, the way Ted Turner colorized old movies for Turner Network for many years. Take these old black and white movies, add some like color stuff to it or whatever, but not really challenging the fundamental way in which the schools operate, the criteria that they operate on, the way that they do tenure. When you bring faculty in, for instance, and you make tenure decisions, just this one example, in part contingent on performance reviews by students, actual classroom evals of students. Well, we know what happens, right? We know that professors of color, particularly women of color, are viciously downgraded in performance reviews, usually based on issues of real significant bias and hostility toward the subject matter that's being taught or the issues or the discussions. I mean, I've heard stories of, faculty. I remember one, and it's going to sound like I'm making it up, but it's not. There was a woman years ago, a Black woman at a school in the Midwest, who told me that she was teaching a class on African-American women's literature. That was the name of the class in the catalog on the website, African-American women's literature. And at the end of the year in the student evaluations, one of the student evals said, well, this was a pretty good class, but I mean, it's sort of a bummer that all we did was study Black women writers. It's just sort of like, what class did you sign up for? Now,
right.
This faculty member, her chair of her department knew that was a ridiculous critique, right? But but there are similar stories of students
Mm-hmm.
saying this class made me feel bad. I felt like I was being attacked, and then you just know there's something going on. We know from the research that white folks often feel attacked just if you say something like systemic racism, and they feel attacked, even though by definition, if I say the racism is systemic, I ain't talking to you as a person, right? If I say it's systemic, this isn't about you. Why are you are you the system? Are you the system? Because if I say it's systemic, I didn't call you anything. I didn't say you were a racist. I'm not talking about you. I mean, I might be, but I didn't in that moment. Not talking about your mom, not talking about your dad, not talking about your cousins, not talking about nothing. I'm talking about the system, but white folks will get bent out of shape about any kind of hard conversation. So unless schools are very careful, their tenuring decisions get affected by things like that. Their tenuring decisions get affected. When you say you got a 5-year term to roughly 4, 5, 6 years, whatever it is at a given school to get tenure, but now I'm a faculty of color who's coming in. I don't have the same mentors. I don't have the same level of connections. I don't have this, and I'm being asked to put out fires on campus. Whenever a race thing comes up, I got to go be on the committee. I got to go sit on the next search committee to try to find the next Black person in a department that's not even mine because y'all want my eyeballs on it, but you're not paying me extra for that. You're not putting that into my tenure evaluation. But I'm expected to do all that and publish and teach and go to conferences. So people of color are being asked to do all the same stuff white folks are being asked to do to get tenure and to do all this extra combat without combat pay, right? Without that being part of the evaluation process. I don't think that schools deliberately necessarily think to themselves, oh, we're not going to give them any credit for doing that. But I just think they don't think about it. I think that they're institutions that don't realize they're getting unpaid emotional and even physical labor from faculty of color, and it's affecting them when it comes time for something like, a tenure review.
Yeah. I mean, you opened the door here to something I was looking at that I was going to ask you about. And we'll step on a lot of toes here. You talked about the work that gets done under the rubric of DEI. Doesn't, I'm going to read here what you had said, or what I read here, that the DEI doesn't challenge fundamental cultural norms or practices that contribute to inequity, rendering DEI efforts DOA, dead on arrival, regardless of the good intentions of those charged with implementing them. So we're talking about, on college campuses, and you say that these failures are actually letting down the employees, staff, and students of color and doing real damage. So what exactly do you mean there, and how can institutions do better? I think you kind of touched on it a little bit here when we talked about the tenure process, but how else is that manifesting?
Well, I mean, I think we just have all these schools that all over the years have written these lovely mission statements that overwhelmingly nowadays mention diversity and inclusion and sometimes equity. And some will even go further and they'll mention social justice. There are a lot of schools that actually, particularly like Jesuit schools and certain other schools that I've worked with, that have that as part of their mission and or vision and or value statement. But I don't think many of those have really necessarily thought about what it means to operationalize that. Like, what does it mean? That's your mission, that's your vision, that's your value statement. But the decisions that you make, are you filtering every decision through that lens? Because it seems to me that if I have mission over here, this is my mission, this is what I say I'm about, this is what I say I'm here for, that every decision that I make, from the admission criteria to the financial aid decisions, to the recruitment and outreach, to the tenuring and the hiring of faculty, to the hiring of staff and the promotion of staff, to the curriculum development, to the programming, everything, to the community the relationship between the campus and the community that it serves. All of that ought to be filtered through the lens of that mission, because that's what the mission is. This is what you said you're here for. And I don't think schools do that enough. I've come across some schools that I think do a better job than others. They usually have somebody whose job it is. Sometimes they even call them a dean of mission or something like that. And that person's job is to serve as an ombudsperson, if you will, to sort of make sure the mission is infiltrating every aspect of the school. But most schools don't do that. They just sort of put it up there and it's a pretty thing. And most people couldn't tell you what the mission is if you asked them. And sometimes you got to search like 6 pages deep on the website, to find what it is. And so I think that's a real problem. You say you're doing this stuff and maybe you are at the margins, but if you're not prefacing it with mission, here's what the problem is. It means, number one, it's easy to slip up and not do it, because if mission isn't front of mind, sometimes it seems like extra work, right? You're like, oh, I got to do that. Well, yeah, because it's the mission. If you remembered that was the mission, then you would do that. You wouldn't see it as like this extra weight you're having to carry around. You would see it as being central. The second thing is, if you don't lead with it being part of the mission, the backlash is a lot easier for people to foment, right? Because they can make it seem like it's extra. So now if I'm not down for that thing and I'm on your campus, I can be like, what's all this politically correct woke bullshit that they're making me do? No, dude, it's in the mission. Did you not read that before you applied? Like, did your high school counselor not tell you that that's what this school's about? Because it's right there, man. You should have looked it up on the website. You clearly did not do your due diligence. You might need to transfer. Right? Like, just be clear about who you are. And then if I'm like a progressive anti-racist person and I look at your mission and it's sort of weak, then I'll know ahead of time, like, I don't want to go to that. I'm not going to Bob Jones. I'm not going to BYU. I'm not going to whatever, Oral Roberts University. And if you're somebody who's down for those missions of those schools, you're not going to want to come to whatever. Like, so I just think being clear keeps you focused as an institution and all your moving parts focused. And it makes it harder for this backlash to take root because you've been upfront. You were transparent. It's not some extra stuff you're adding on because somebody pressured you and you folded to some demonstrators. It's because this was in your mission statement to begin with. And I've been telling schools for years that they should create some, almost like a social audit equivalent of the Princeton Review and all these different U.S. News and World Report rankings, that use these very traditional criteria of test scores and volumes in the library and what percentage of your faculty are full-time versus adjunct and all that. And instead create like a social audit ranking that talks about, things that are related to equity, like not only verbal commitments, but like, what is your graduation rate? Not just overall, but what are the size of the gaps between your white students and your students of color? And the ones that have lower gaps are the ones that are going to rank higher, right? The ones that actually move toward equity. I think there are a bunch of schools, by the way, that would be into that kind of ranking. I know some wouldn't want to take part in it, but I think there are a lot. There are 4,200 or something degree granting institutions in this country. I'm quite confident that there are hundreds of them that would want to take part in something like that. And if you start to create that, that's also from a branding and a marketing perspective. And I don't like to be cynical about this stuff, but from a branding and marketing perspective, that's a way of saying, hey, if this is what you care about, if this is stuff that you care about, here's how you know what these schools are. And I think that's going to attract a whole different cadre of people so that 5-10 years from now, that school has grown itself organically into something that's anti-racist. And then the people who aren't down for that will select out. Right. And they'll just go somewhere else. And then we don't have to fight these battles every 3 or 4 years because it's like, oh, we got a new president and now we got to do this all over again. Well, the president's still working off that same mission statement. So shouldn't be an issue. Right.
Yeah. Well, you just gave a unsolicited plug for something we're doing at Diverse. We actually have a ranking system of exactly what you're talking about. We've been doing the research on it with another group here for the past 2 years.
Great.
And we're actually we'll be releasing the first cohort of those institutions that are doing what you're saying and then some that are, they're doing transformative, diversity work.
Great.
And it's called the Do It program. But yeah, it's going to come out in September of this year. The first cohort of schools. So you're absolutely right. And, all the reasons why you were saying people would want to be on the list and would try to get on the list is exactly why we were doing it. Not in the cynical way of, marketing and making money, but of having these institutions say, hey, look, we are about this. And It's not just in our mission statement. I'm pretty sure, you've read a lot of mission statements, and vision statements prior to going to campus, I'm assuming, because that's what I do. If I'm going to a campus to talk and do that, okay, listen, let me see what they're about, and you see it, and after George Floyd, we had a lot of schools who did ads on our website and our magazine coming out with their new social justice statements, and they were going to do this, also corporate. Cynically, I looked at it a year later and says, maybe we should follow up and see what they're doing. You know what I mean? Right. Did this just happen? I think a lot of people just did it just to be, part of the group, if you will. But
and a lot of them now, in the wake of the backlash, are quiet as a church mouse.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, y'all were all down when this was the thing, but now that you're afraid of the other side coming after you, now you've gone silent again. And so what does that tell us? And to your point about the Do It program, I mean, what's so important about that? And yeah, it's easy to think of it as a cynical branding and marketing thing, but the value of it is this: we are a culture that, for good or for bad, for right or for wrong, we measure everything that we value, and we only value the things that we measure. Right. So whether that's ranking your 10 favorite bands of all time, I see this stuff on Facebook and Twitter, like, what's your 10 favorite movies and why? What's, and then we have, all the AP rankings. We've got like 5 different versions of rankings for basketball and football and baseball, because I guess this ranking they don't trust. So they got to do the coaches poll, and then they got to do this other thing. And so you got all these different rankings, and that's how, and then we've, of course, US News and Princeton Review and all these others for colleges. And that's how we value things. And if we can have a ranking for top party school, like if that's important enough to rank in somebody's mind, like, where can I go party really hard? And clearly it matters, right? Then surely to God, we can also have a listing of schools that do some of this stuff right. And if you do that, it does create its own momentum. It becomes sort of like the good housekeeping seal of approval, or the organic seal on the produce, right? And that stuff can be 9/10 marketing, 1/10 real. Yeah, you got to watch those folks, because once they get that seal of approval, now you got to be careful they don't backslide. But at least having it there is a way to expect some accountability, and maybe to begin to enforce a certain degree of accountability. Because once you're on that list, it's just like being on the US News list. You don't want to go from number 11 to number 30. Nobody wants to slip,
Yeah, I mean, and to your point, and we talked about that and thought about that, and have put in the, I don't know, let's just call them benchmarks, if you will. So if you get the certification, once we go into full phase certification, it's only good for 3 years. So so you got to come back. It's not like something, you win it and you've now got it for life. You got to continue doing it, and it's not just a one-time thing. So but yeah, like I said, we're definitely looking forward to that coming out. So it'll be out in September. I kind of want to move into the classroom. We sort of talked high level about, what's going on at an institutional level. And so, you've worked with a lot of educators, right? K-12 and higher ed. So, and you were talking about your work was training educators to talk about race in the classroom long before, CRT became a buzzword. So how is that going today in light of, critical race theory?
Well, I mean, it's harder in the sense that we have 15, 16, 17 states, whatever the number is now, that have passed legislation to severely restrict what can and cannot be discussed in K-12. And then you have certain states like Florida that are trying to apply that to higher ed as well. Now, my guess is that, at least insofar as colleges are concerned, it is going to be very hard for any state to get away with that, because the courts generally do not look very favorably upon content-based restrictions in higher ed, for sure. I mean, there's just sort of an assumption of academic freedom that generally gets deferred to, even by the reactionary judges who probably hate 9/10 of what we're talking about needing to be done, but there's
Mhm.
still some basic principles that they'll probably apply. At the K-12, it's a little dicier because the courts have given more deference to state lawmakers and policymakers around education for younger people, for people that are not quote unquote adults yet in most cases. So that's a little sketchier. I mean, if we apply basic principles of free speech, it should all be thrown out. But I don't necessarily trust the courts to throw it all out, including for K-12, maybe only for college. So it gets harder. But here's the thing, too. It only gets harder because of the fundamental misunderstanding about what it is we're doing. You know, like I'm getting ready to do a talk in Florida, virtual, coming up soon, that I'm sure if state officials knew that it was happening, they would. Now, it's a private institution, so they have a little bit more leeway, but I'm sure somebody would try to get it pulled.
Yeah.
Now, they would try to do that based on the law that they have passed there, the Anti-Woke Act or whatever it's called. But if you really read what the critics of CRT are attacking and saying you can't teach, it's not actually what any of us do, because there is no attempt, for instance, among critical race theorists or among any anti-racist theorists to teach that all white people are inherently evil or racist. Like that's in the legislation that you can't. Well, nobody teaches that. Nobody says that. Like, yeah, there's probably some Yahoo on Twitter that says that, right? Just to get a rise out of white folks. But like, that's not what any actual functioning anti-racist activist or theorist says. In fact, critical race theory says that race is completely socially constructed. So you can't be inherently racist as a white person because there's no such thing as a white person inherently. So, I mean, obviously, that's not what we're saying. We're not trying to instill guilt. None of us say, for instance, and this is also in the law, that you can't say that what white people today are to blame for the acts of their ancestors. Nobody says that. Literally, no one says that. All of these things are the caricature of what we do. This is sort of like the you know, they're creating this fictional narrative about what we're saying. So with a literal reading of the law, nothing that we do should be banned or restricted. Like if it were just based on an actual reading, I would say fine. Like you can ban all that stuff in theory, it doesn't affect us. But I know that in practice, the interpretation of that law is going to be up to people whom I don't trust, which is why you have states that are pulling books on the civil rights movement, that are banning children's books on the civil rights movement, that are saying, you know, we're not even going to have seminars on the civil rights movement because it might be CRT. Yet the Secretary of State or the Attorney General in Alabama had to explain to apparently a group of white people in Alabama that Black History Month is not CRT, that it doesn't violate the law. You know, so the problem is it's so vague. And this is what the right is doing. It's a kind of soft authoritarianism as a lead up to much harder authoritarianism. What I mean by that is, if you look at everything they've been trying to do, the anti-CRT stuff, the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida and copycats of that around the country, and with their attack on reproductive justice and reproductive freedom, every single one of the bills start out as an intimidation tactic. The goal is to make you so scared that you won't teach this. So you're not actually banning anything. You're just saying you could get sued. We're going to give parents the right to sue you as a teacher. And the idea is, well, I'm a teacher, I only make 48 grand a year or whatever. I'm just not even going to take a chance. Same thing with the Don't Say Gay stuff. It's like, we're going to let people sue you if I'm a teacher and let's say I'm in a same-sex marriage, am I going to put the picture of my spouse on my desk? Well, no, because some parent might sue me. So technically they didn't ban me from doing it. They just intimidated me. With abortion in Texas, what was the first thing before Roe got overturned? It was a bounty hunter bill. It was saying, we're going to let people sue you or your doctor or whoever gives you a ride to the clinic if you go out of state, or if we'll let them chase you across state lines and basically bring a civil suit. And that way they could say, oh, we didn't really ban it. We just gave people a civil cause of action. The idea being that the clinics will say, we're just not going to take the risk. We don't have the money to take all these lawsuits. Right. So it's soft authoritarianism. It's an ingenious, evil, wicked strategy. But that's what they're trying to do, is cause so much fear. And when it comes to the race stuff, it's just trying to get all these teachers to feel so afraid to talk about racism that they'll quit. And unfortunately, that they'll either not talk about it or they'll retire. They'll just give up. And we're seeing that around the country. We're seeing people who are in these positions, good teachers, who are saying, I'm just not, I can't teach anymore under these conditions, and they're quitting. And the problem is they're going to be replaced by the folks that we don't want teaching, right? The ones who are not going to talk about this. It actually makes me very angry. I understand why the teachers are afraid, but if you're going to quit, you might as well be willing to stay and get fired. You know what I mean? If you're willing to quit, you ought to be willing to get fired and then sue their ass, because once you get fired, you have a cause of action. Now, once you get fired, you have what's called standing to go to court. But if you quit, you don't have standing, right? So this is, again, it's all intended to make us so afraid that we just can't talk about anything. We can't talk about history. We can't talk about what's in the news. We can't discuss any subject. And so it's going to get harder, but we've got to have people brave enough to say, no, I'm willing. You want to try to sue me for this? Fine. We're going to go to court and we're going to win, because what you're doing is unconstitutional, and everybody knows it. But if you're too afraid to stand up, then you sort of give away the store ahead of time. And I just am afraid that this kind of intimidation is working with far too many people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm laughing to myself thinking about what you just said in regards to those teachers not staying. And when they don't stay, they get replaced by the teachers who will teach, quote unquote, what they want. So it made me think about when we were talking with Robin DiAngelo a few weeks ago, we were talking about the phrase involuntary relocation. Do you remember that, or did you hear about that?
I don't know. You have to clarify.
Oh, well, involuntary relocation is what the Texas legislature was in a bill or something like that. That is how teachers are to now refer to slavery.
Oh yeah, that was voted down, but they were talking about it for a while. Yeah.
So I mean, I'm saying, but you get teachers in who would just, I mean, that to me that just seems so bogus. But you would get people who would actually teach that.
Well, they've had that. Look, I mean, Texas only started teaching that the Civil War was principally about the desire to maintain enslavement. They only started teaching that in 2018, actually. All of the years prior to that, it was just among the factors, and it was considered very minor. And they continued to teach fundamentally a neo-Confederate version of history. So they only started telling the truth about that, which is hilarious, because if you read the state of Texas own secession document, right, the actual part where they say why they're doing what they're doing, seceding from the Union, the entire document is about the desire to maintain the system of enslavement of Black people. They didn't list a single other reason. Like, that's the entire document. And yet for all those years, they basically were like, I mean, it was one of the factors, but, there were these other ones. And there weren't, not in the eyes of the people that actually did it at the time. We concocted all those. So, yeah, I mean, I think Texas has a long history of this. And the danger is that, Texas has a disproportionate impact on the textbook market nationwide, because it's such a big state that if Texas ultimately has enough power to tell textbook authors, take this out, take this out, take this out, that affects what you're going to learn in Nebraska, and what you're going to learn in Illinois, and what you're going to learn in Oregon, Right.
Yeah. No, you're right. That slippery slope there. Gosh, I mean, I've had so many things I wanted to ask you about or talk about, but we're starting to run out of time here. But I did want to, see if we can squeeze this in, because this is something that has come up, in the number of recent conversations we've been having with folks, dealing with, racism and nationalism and, LGBT pride issues, is having, especially for these people on campus doing the work, how can they, what do you recommend they do to get more people to become allies, or what do they need to do as practitioners to gain allies in DEI work?
Well, I mean, on the one hand, I think it's important to remember that that folks of color, when it comes to race, and LGBTQ folk, when it comes to sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, et cetera, have to be the fundamental agents of change and their own liberation. That it isn't first and foremost about how do we get white people, or how do we get straight folks and cisgendered folks?
Mm-hmm.
Or how do we get men? Like, that's important, but fundamentally, it's still about the marginalized, sort of being the leaders of that and the agents of their own liberation. Having said that, it is certainly the case historically, and this is an insight of critical race theory and Derek Bell, the father of critical race theory, that there has never been any movement forward, particularly for Black folks in this country, until the interest of those Black folks happened to dovetail with the larger society, including a lot of white folks. Right. This notion of interest convergence. And we can complain about that, and we can scream about that, and we can say how unfair that is. It doesn't make it not true. And so clearly there is importance in solidarity. I think the way we do that is we talk about the interest convergence. We talk about the way that white folks ultimately pay a price for the indulgence of inequality, the indulgence of privilege, the indulgence of fragility, the indulgence of our own obliviousness actually leaves us in a lot of ways considerably worse off. I mean, even with regard to something like police violence, you hear white folks who will say, in response to those of us who talk about the disproportionate use of violence against Black bodies by police, they'll say, well, more white people are killed each year by police than Black people. Two things. Number one, there are more white people. So of course that's true. Per capita, it's not true. It's disproportionately against Black people. But secondly, what kind of defense is that? Like, right. If your argument is, well, I mean, cops kill a lot of white people too. So what's the problem? It's like, wait, but why? Why do they kill so many white people? And why is it that cops kill more white people here than cops kill white people in any other mostly white country? Why? You could take out all the killing of Black and brown people by law enforcement in this country, and you would still have the highest rate of police violence against just white people of any other country on earth. Why? Why do we have such brutal law enforcement? Well, because the history of law enforcement is a history that is entirely tied up with white supremacy. So when you create a law enforcement mentality and culture that's rooted in controlling them, eventually they're going to do that shit to you too. That's how it works. So actually white people end up suffering even that disproportionately because we've indulged Black people having that and brown people having that experience. So I think we do it based on that. And I think we do it also based on, we got to teach white people about the history of allyship and solidarity. If you've never seen that, right? If your idea of solidarity is just some white person out in the street with a sign during the George Floyd protest, and you don't know, there's like a whole history going back to the colonial period. There have been white folks, never the majority to be sure, but that there have been white folks all throughout 400 years who have stood up and said no to this thing, who have resisted this thing, who have followed the leadership of Black and brown peoples in solidarity. And most of them, their names are lost to history. We don't teach about them in the history books. If you don't see those folks, then you don't have that white role model. So you think, oh, I don't even know how to do this. Like, I don't even know what this looks like. Like, how would I even do this with integrity? Or how would I not make mistakes? Well, you're going to make mistakes. These folks that I'm talking about made them, but you could learn from them. You could learn from the shortcomings. You could also learn from the successes. So part of what we got to start doing in K-12 and in college is making sure that those stories get told too, because that's the best way to short circuit this argument that the right makes that, oh, anti-racism makes white people feel guilty about their race. If you're feeling guilty about being white, it is because you are learning about the wrong white people. Right? You're learning about the white folks that did the oppression, not the white folks that stood up and resisted the oppression. If all you know about is Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson and those folks, then you might feel a little lousy. But that's what traditional history does. If you were learning critical history, if you were learning critical race theory, you would know better. See? Right. So we have to do more CRT, not less, more systemic analysis, not less. Right. And actually talk about that stuff. And that's how I think we'll grow allies, whether we're talking about race, gender, sexuality, or anything else. Gotcha.
Hey, thank you. We are definitely here at the end of time. And, I appreciate hearing your perspective, because typically in this work, it's oftentimes people of color and most often white women. And if the times that I have, dealt with white males, they're usually in the LGBTQ, population. So I thank you. And I think our audience will appreciate it of hearing that perspective from you. So just in closing, just want you to finish this sentence to sort of, close us out here. So if I say, here's the sentence, white men need to blank.
I'm always so bad at this.
Oh, it's easy.
I think white men need to do a lot of things, but to finish the sentence, I would say practice radical humility.
Okay.
And I mean that whether you're a white man in a corporate or political power position who, you've been encouraged to think whatever you got, you earned. Practice some radical humility and understand there have been some systemic advantages that you've had. And then if you're an anti-racist white man, you also have to practice some radical humility and recognize that what I've learned, I mean, just on a personal level, I've learned most of what I know about this system from mentors and teachers and friends and colleagues of color. And so radical humility for me means acknowledging that base of wisdom. So no matter where you are in the spectrum on these issues, a little radical humility is what I think is called for.
All right. Thank you, Tim.
You bet. Thank you.